Well, my first thought as you bring up both of them together is exactly what you just asked about the age limit. Like, I don't think they'd be making these comments at age 70. you know?
You're tuned in to the Ross Tucker Football Podcast, guiding your gridiron journey, none other than your host, former NFL lineman, Ross Tucker.
Oh, yeah, it is. But it's not just any Ross Tucker Football Podcast. It is a Wisdom Wednesday with the wisdom coming from my man, Andrew Brandt. We're not even messing around. It's Big Show time on the simulcast.
The Big Show.
He is back, and we are back together. Always great to do a simulcast with my buddy Andrew Brandt, the host of the critically acclaimed Business of Sports podcast. I know a lot of you are listening to us on Andrew's feed, which is great. I'm Ross Tucker, the former NFL offensive lineman. A bunch of you are listening or watching youtube.com/Ross Tucker NFL to Andrew and I on the Ross Tucker Football Podcast feed. I played 7 years in the NFL a long time ago. Now I get a chance to call games on TV for the Eagles and CBS and on the radio for Westwood One. Andrew Brandt, a true Renaissance man, was a longtime agent, was the GM of the Barcelona Dragons, which might be my favorite note in his fun resume. And then he was a longtime executive with the Green Bay Packers before getting into the media side of the business. And I feel like it's crazy, Andrew, because I feel like we probably talk this week every year, the first week of the NFL training camps, all the camps opening around, because there's always all kinds of contractual stuff going on. But this year, it kind of even went a step further with everything going on with the NFLPA, which I want to get to with you momentarily as well.
Good to be with you, Ross. Again, there are a lot of people listening on your feed. If you haven't been exposed to the business of sports, I try to take all our listeners inside the inner workings, behind the curtain, what really goes on in sports. Ross and I are not only colleagues on his podcast network, we're friends. And when he texted me a nice birthday message this weekend, I'm like, thanks, Ross, and we got to do a simulcast. We haven't done one for a while. So it's the perfect time as the NFL gets going and our respective expertises come into play. So let's get right to it. It's fascinating to me what's been going on with the union, Ross. You were a member of the union. I have commented often about the union over the last 15 years. When I got into the media business, my first big assignment was covering the collective bargaining agreement negotiations back in 2011. And I got a role at ESPN, and we were doing this podcast every week. And it's really continued to be labor, I wouldn't say strife, but I would say less than labor peace for the past 15 years, even though we have collective bargaining agreements. And the issue we usually talk about, Ross, is external to the NFLPA and their dealings with the NFL and whether they've gotten good deals or not, whether they left on the table, how are they dealing with all these things. But now, again, this is internal. This is about the union itself and what's been going on there. And even your podcast is part of the story from a couple years ago, right? So I'll let you steer this. I think it's fascinating how we've got so much strife, not only among the union versus the NFL, but the union internally as well.
You know, one thing I think is so fascinating too about it, Andrew, and I actually asked my audience for their feedback. I didn't get as much of a response as I was looking for. I really, truly don't know how much people care about like NFLPA issues. You know what I mean? Like I know people care about contracts for players on their team. I could talk about NFLPA stuff all day because I lived it. It sort of relates to me on some level, with benefits and things like that. But I never get the sense. I mean, I think there are people that are curious, but one thing, and I don't know if this is a positive or a negative for the NFLPA, people don't really care that much unless it might involve a work stoppage or potentially missing games. I don't know what kind of feedback you've gotten.
Yeah, I agree with you. And what's been interesting to me in covering these CBA negotiations, both 2011 and 2019-20, and then the one that just happened, the extension, I just think that, you know, media and people will get very attuned to a player contract holdout, to a player contract issue, like we're going to discuss later in this podcast. But for the collective agreement, which in many ways is more important than the individual agreement, right? The collective agreement between the 2,000 NFL players and the league, which goes through benefits and goes through all that, what happens upon a trade, and then the financial stuff, the franchise tag and the revenue split, which I think is so important, and the commissioner power and those kind of things. Yeah, I think you're right. People just kind of like, just tell me if it's done so we don't have to worry about it. And I think speaking as an expert, in many ways, that's more important than any individual player contract negotiation, because everything comes from there. And I know people will complain about franchise tag and about why players don't make guaranteed contracts and this and that. It all stems from that. It all stems from the collective contract. So again, every NFL player has two agents. They have an individual agent and they have a collective agent. That collective agent is the NFLPA, and their agreement is called the CBA, collective bargaining agreement. And you're right, it doesn't get the attention as individual player contracts.
You know, I'm going to ask you a broad-based question that I've never asked you before. And then we might circle back on some of the sordid details of the NFLPA and expense reports and resignations and all that stuff. But I think this is the aspect of it that interests me the most. You and I both recognize that the NFLPA is not as strong of a union as the MLBPA or the NBA Players Association. We also recognize why that is, right? Because there's a lot more players. They have much shorter careers. They're not as willing to, miss games, miss paychecks as their brethren in the other sports. I guess my question, Andrew, is do you think the NFLPA not being as strong as those other unions is in some part responsible for the unbelievable popularity of the NFL? Because I'm sitting here and thinking like how bad the Deshaun Watson contract is, right? And there was collusion after that, according to an arbitrator. But the reality is there's a lot of albatross contracts like that in the NBA and in baseball that are not really good overall for those teams or the sport. The NFL doesn't really have those. The NFL has more of an ability to kind of cut dead weight. The NFL has more of an ability to put games international or to add a 17th game or all these things that ultimately I feel like fans like, and there's more labor peace, and there's not load management, and the players aren't running the show in terms of, no, they're announcing 3 years early that they're not going to re-sign with Milwaukee or whatever. I guess I'm wondering, do you think the fact that the union and the players aren't as strong is in some part responsible, I guess, positively for the popularity of the entire league?
It's a great question. Here's what I think. I think that there's some deficiencies with NFLPA representation. Those deficiencies do not seem to impact the popularity of the sport. Deficiencies where they can't, in my opinion, get the right revenue split, where they can't get the total revenue share that other sports have, which shouldn't really matter to a fan, whether an NFL player body can get a share of, say, relocation revenue or stadium signage revenue or club seat revenue in terms of their calculation of the split. But yes, I think there's a feeling out there among the fan base that, we're not going to have a lot of these labor problems that are in other sports. Like the NFL is never going to be beholden to the superstar NBA player that wakes up one morning and decides he doesn't want to be place, right? And I pointed this out with the Packers 4 years ago. Aaron Rodgers wanted out, and the Packers said, "Nah, no, maybe next year or the next year when they did let him out, but no." And if that was, pick a name: Kawhi Leonard, Kevin Durant, James Harden, yeah, they're out. They can orchestrate that. That is what you're saying. That attracts fans. Like, we know we're going to get our football. We know we're not going to have these issues. And yeah, we have this 24-hour news cycle where we delve into every little detail, but it's there. I think it helps. Having said that, I'm not going to subscribe to the thing, Ross, where like, yeah, they'll never get a great deal because there's too many players and they don't want to miss. Listen, the other sports have a lot of players. The other sports have a lot of players making minimum and then superstars. The other sports have similar issues, just not as many players, and it's never stopped them from being harder in negotiations. If you're just going to say, and maybe I'm making too much of this, if you're just going to say, well, they'll never really get gains because they'll never strike and they're just always going to give in because their career's short. If you say that, then what are we doing? Like, why hire a great negotiator as your leader for the NFLPA? Why press on every year? Like, if you're just going to say that and roll over, no, I'm not buying that. I think they could be better represented to get a better deal. Maybe at the end, they do agree to a deal without a strike, but maybe it's a better deal if they get better people.
By the way, in person now, happy birthday. Nice to say happy birthday to you.
Thank you,
It's
sir.
interesting because, I'm leading you somewhere here, but the Packers have a mandatory retirement age for their team president of 70, correct?
Correct.
How do you feel about that? And by the way, there were two owners over 80 that spoke yesterday or this week or whatever that I'm going to get to. I guess I'm curious about, and maybe this is a sensitive subject now that you're 65, Andrew, which, by the way, nobody would ever know if you hadn't wrote it on social media that you're 65.
Yeah. Listen to
Nobody would ever guess that. So maybe this is a sensitive subject, but your thoughts on the Packers kind of, and maybe they can move it back to 75, but like the idea of a mandatory retirement age.
Yeah, it's something at the Packers I questioned when I got in there. And again, I served under Bob Harlan, who was maybe like me. I appreciate your comments. Very young, a very young 60-ish-year-old when I worked for him and 70-year-old when he retired, and kept on as an emeritus chairman. So he stayed around the offices. He was always around, even when Mark Murphy took over the job. I think this is something in corporate America where you sort of got to set it sounds harsh, but you got to sort of set a time for transfer. It is harsh. It's arbitrary. When does somebody lose their best faculties? Is it 65, 70, 75, 80? At some point, you've got to make that call. I understood it because the NFL changes so fast, and it's important to have fresh blood. And when you don't have family ownership, like the two teams we're going to discuss, there has to be a way to sort of push in new blood all the time. So I have no problem with that. And I don't think Bob Harlan had a problem with it. I don't think Mark Murphy had a problem with it as he bows out this week. The families and the NFL and some of these teams, yeah, I mean, they're going to hang on. They're going to hang on.
Well, and so, and I'll talk about this maybe more later in the show, but Jerry Jones made comments, I think it was Monday, where he basically insulted four of his players. Said they should have waited to do the contracts for Terrence Steele and Trayvon Diggs. They did those early, and that in hindsight, they probably shouldn't have. That's not a compliment for those guys. And then he says, well, Dak Prescott made him the highest paid player. He missed 2/3 of the season. Or, went ahead and, Micah, we could sign him to a deal, and he still might not be there. I think is 82. Mike Brown made some comments. He's
Yeah.
89. It's a really sensitive subject, but I guess just your thoughts on those guys still kind of being the mouthpiece and the front man, whether they're doing the negotiating or not, but the mouthpiece and the front man for these teams that have these contract issues.
Well, my first thought as you bring up both of them together is exactly what you just asked about the age limit. Like, I don't think they'd be making these comments at age 70, and I don't know what I'm saying here, but I'm just saying, like, they're either past the point of caring what people think of these comments, or they're just immune to what they had to know would be criticism of these comments. Now, they're diametrically opposed. If I think back to my 10 years of NFL meetings, Ross, I couldn't pick two more owners further apart on the spectrum. Mike Brown is, I think the word is penurious. He saves every dollar. He's stingy. He fights against every measure of the league that makes it kind of bigger and more corporate. Jerry Jones is bluster and bravado and big time. Let's make the league bigger. Owners like Mike Brown don't do enough to make their franchise bigger, to market it. They just collect the 132nd check every year, and they don't do enough. So I saw those kind of interactions. But now both of them are mired in these comments about the players. The players are the product. The players are their storefront. They don't need to bash their players. Now, strategy, you and I know this. We talked about this in an earlier podcast. The Cowboys do it every year. Let a guy get all the way to the end, whether that end is training camp or the start of the season, in Prescott's case, 2 hours before opening game, and pay him top of the market. And I don't know why we won't see the exact same thing with Parsons. Whether it happens in early August, late August, or early September, they'll bitch and moan like he just did, but they'll pay him top of the market. I don't know why they wait. You just talked about injuries. One theory is they just wait and see if he's going to get injured. And if he doesn't, they give the big deal. It's going to happen. Brown, I think two parts. The Hendrickson thing will work out. I just think, it sounds like they're negotiating. They're working on that. The rookie thing, we haven't talked about it, Ross, but this is a language issue. They want to impose their will on language in Shamar Stewart's contract that hasn't been there in the other rookie contracts ever. It's not about Shamar Stewart. It's about creating a precedent that they can have forever with their next rookie contracts that they don't have, that other teams like the Eagles, like the Rams, like teams have in their contracts, the Packers, which basically says if you default during your contract, year 1, 2, 3, the rest of it is not guaranteed. It's still an active contract. You just don't have the guarantee you get. Language, imposing their will, knowing that Stewart has no options, I think that will happen eventually.
There's a lot there.
Yeah.
But I want to get to, I think Micah Parsons and the Cowboys, I've asked you previous years, nobody really has an explanation for why the Cowboys do what they do, other than, maybe what Jerry Jones said about Trayvon Diggs and Terrence Steele. They did those early, and I don't think they thought they got a good return on those investments so far. And also, he literally said he could get hit by a car. They want to wait, and as long as possible, he could get hit by a car. My question for you is, it's now been confirmed that we have at least 2 veteran player holdouts, Andrew. And I know I've asked this other years, but it's mind-boggling to me. And they are Terry McLaurin, wide receiver for Washington, Trey Hendrickson, edge rusher for the Bengals. Interestingly, they're both working on like their third contracts. They're both like around 30, which might be one of the reasons why the deals aren't done yet. But they're holding out, Andrew, which is $50,000 per day, mandatory, and it can't be forgiven. And I guess I look at these other guys that have done hold-ins recently and then gotten deals. You think about Jamar Chase or Brandon Ayuk or whomever, right? And I don't know what the dynamic is or the conversation with the team, whether you tell them you're holding in or you just report and then say that you have a hamstring injury or a back injury or whatever. But I can't for the life of me understand how it helps anybody in any way for guys to hold out and lose $50,000 a day, because that makes the negotiation tougher, and that's money you're not getting back. And I know they say, well, they'll just give you more in the deal, right? But then that's still something you're shrinking the pie every single day.
And what seems to work better, you identified it, is a hold in where you go to camp, you're not all in, you're kind of practicing but not practicing, waiting to get a deal done. Listen, in both these situations, we've seen the market take off. So Hendrickson signed when the defensive edge market was pretty good, but now it's more than pretty good. It's top of the market besides quarterback. And McLaurin signed when the market was pretty good. He signed along, I remember DJ Metcalf did a deal at the same time, and Deebo Samuel, his teammate, did a deal at the same time, but now that market's taken off. I'm going to put the team side here. 30 is a magic number, unfortunately. So both these guys turning 30. If I'm a team, I'm like, I would say behind closed doors, or somehow phrase it to the agent, I'm happy to pay big money year 1 and 2. But I don't want to be stuck with this contract in past 31. So I think what's probably going on is they're talking about money that is escalating in the first couple of years, but no guarantees past that. And maybe the player agents are fighting that. And whether the money continues to go up to give a huge average when they're in the 30s. And teams don't want to do that unless it's an understanding that these are kind of fluff years for no purpose. But I can see these being contentious. I can also see them transitioning into hold-ins to avoid the $50,000 a day. The McLaurin one's really interesting, Ross. There's been so much good vibes around that team. And yeah, this is a really respected player. So we'll see how this one shakes out.
You got to check him out on social media at Andrew Brandt. I'm at Ross Tucker NFL. For those of you listening on the Business of Sports side, love the Business of Sports podcast. Highly recommend everyone check it out every week. And certainly love if those of you check out any of the shows over here. Ross Tucker Football Podcast, Even Money Betting, Fantasy Feast, and College Draft. Perfect timing, as always, Andrew. Wouldn't be surprised if we do another one of these before the season actually kicks off. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Ross. Thanks again for the birthday wishes. Thanks to everyone.
Time to finish this episode strong right after this. The countdown is on. Going to a concert on Friday night thanks to Game Time. It's Sam Hunt. My wife loves him. Not sure how I should feel about that. Friday night, Hard Rock Live in Atlantic City. Literally, those of you watching on YouTube, youtube.com/Ross Tucker NFL, you can see I'm on the Game Time app right now looking at what seats they still have available. Now, I already have my seats, but it's just nice to see what the price range is. You guys can go. Maybe you can run into me. That'd be awesome. Just make sure if you're going to go, you download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code ROSS for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. So again, create an account and redeem code ROSS for $20 off. You want to download the Game Time app. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed, and you can see the view from your seat, which is amazing. Hopefully I can see some of you guys there.
Tuck's Takes.
All right, Ross, did you have any other thoughts on Jerry Jones taking shots at his players in his opening press conference?
Well, there's no logic there in terms of the negative comments he made about his players, other than he doesn't care, like Andrew pointed out, or just showing them who's boss. I will say I am now like 100% convinced that he has recognized that a contract holdout is good for attention, good for free publicity that other businesses have to pay for, because people will be talking about Micah Parsons and his contract the entire month of August until he signs a huge deal in September.
Bengals defensive end Trey Hendrickson and Commanders wideout Terry McLaurin, they are both officially holdouts.
Gonna make this my Labatt take, Jack. Brought to you by Labatt. With Labatt, you can buy beer and get gear. Go to their website, snap a photo of your receipt, upload it to gain points towards exclusive merch. Any size, any product, anywhere you're buying Labatt, sign up at rewards.labattusa.com. I don't understand this. Someone has to explain this to me. Why would you give up $50,000 per day? It doesn't help you. You can't get the money back. It doesn't help the team. That money's gone. They have to give it to NFL charities. It helps nobody to hold out, especially when we've seen guys hold in and have some success with it. Jordan Love held in for like a week last year, Tua for a couple days, Brandon Ayuk, Jamar Chase. I think there might be a couple guys holding in right now that are talking about injuries. I don't understand why Terry McLaurin and Trey Hendrickson would do this. I think it's the wrong advice for a bunch of different reasons.
A lot of transactions. Packers, they give right tackle Zach Tom as an offensive lineman record $30 million plus signing bonus, part of his new contract in Green Bay. Titans quarterback Will Levis, he undergoes season-ending shoulder surgery. Longtime NFL safety Tyrann Mathieu retired. Eagles, they signed edge rusher Agbo Okoronkwo. Chargers, they sign running back Naheem Hines. Cowboys, they bring in edge rusher James Houston. And Browns, second-round running back Quinshon Judkins remains the only rookie other than Bengals Shamar Stewart that has not signed his contract.
Levis getting shoulder surgery the first day of training camp or whatever in a week from now is kind of wild, like the timing of that. Tyrann Mathieu, it doesn't sound like the Saints were ready for that retirement. And then the Judkins thing, in a weird way, is like, you can see why the Bengals and the Cowboys have the thoughts they do around the contract, right? Like, this guy, it would have been voided because he's getting arrested, and stuff like this can happen, which is why the Cowboys wait as long as they can. Judkins is like the poster child for why the Bengals and the Cowboys are operating the way they do right now. I think we're done here.
Thanks for tuning in to the Ross Tucker Football Podcast. Make sure to also check out Even Money, Fantasy Feast, and College Draft, all on the DraftKings Network on Samsung TV Plus, YouTube, or subscribe to the podcast on your favorite platform.
Shout out myfrontpagestory.com. Man, anniversaries, there's a lot of them coming up in August and September. A lot of weddings. Get your significant other or any of the special people in your life a gift that keeps on giving. myfrontpagestory.com. Backofficescheduler.com. HumanHeadNYC.com. Sporticulture. Pizza Boy Brewing.